All right, everybody, welcome back into Cherry Picking. Today's video, buy low, sell high centers for the rest of the fantasy hockey season. As always, the video presented by FanDuel Canada, North America's #1 sportsbook. That link is in the description below to download the app today. We've got 3 buy low centers and 2 sell high centers. Let's get into today's video. So the first guy we're going to be buying low on is Aleksander Barkov on the Florida Panthers. Through 41 games this year, he's 41 points. So a point per game. So you might say like, oh, it's not really like a buy low opportunity, but really, since the start of the new calendar year, since December 28th, Barkov's been very underwhelming. His points production as well. His last 14 games played, he has 8 points. Obviously not the best, but through 41 games, having 41 points is still pretty solid. And we're looking at the similar production from the last 2 seasons. Last year, he had 80 points. However, I think with where Florida is in the standings and how they're playing right now, it's very doable for him to finish with, let's say, 45 to 50 points in his last 40 games. So we're going to try to get him. We're going to try and trade for him. Good sign, his first 2-point game or multi-point game since December 20th. He marked that against the Sharks over the weekend. And I think we're going to see it continue here because he now is playing on a line with Sam Reinhart, which he usually does play with whenever both of these guys are healthy. But Sam Reinhart's also probably one of the best goal scorers in the NHL over the past 365 days, if you're looking back to last season as well. And then you have Matt Tkachuk, who's just an awesome forechecker and a guy who will disrupt pretty much any goalie that they're playing against. So obviously a line that drives a ton of offense. I definitely obviously recommend trading for Barkov. To be fair, in one of the leagues I'm in, I gave up Gustafsson because I had a ton of goalies and to get Aleksander Barkov and a draft pick. Made the most sense for me. I needed a center. So something like that, a trade like that you could do. Or if you want to go a 1-for-1 center, I have some sell highs on this list that maybe you can keep into a trade offer or depending on what you're trying to trade at that point. But yeah, Aleksander Barkov at this point is definitely someone I'd be trying to trade for. All right, so the first guy we're going to be selling high on this list is Mark Scheifele on the Winnipeg Jets. He's currently top 15 in the NHL in points with 56, tied third in goals with 28. And we're trading him. For one, he's shooting 24%, which is second behind all centers who have played at least 40 games this year. The only guy he has a higher shooting percentage, or the only guy that has a higher shooting percentage than Scheifele at this point, when you're looking at centers, is Braden Point, whose shooting percentage is always kind of very high, considering he's a very skilled forward who scores a lot of goals consistently. Scheifele, it's relatively inconsistent. We definitely haven't seen this from him over the past few years, especially like you're looking at Scheifele's shooting percentage. Last year was 16%, and he's never been higher than 20%. So 24% to say he's going to continue to do that for the rest of the season, I think is relatively unrealistic. He does other things well, wins a ton of faceoffs. However, looking at his offensive production, it's kind of easy to expect some regression in goal scoring here, in my opinion. Out of all centers, he's 15th in individual expected goals for or offensive creation since the start of the season. He has 18 expected goals for. But if you look at him since the start of January, we've definitely seen his individual production dwindle a little bit. He's outside the top 30 in terms of expected goals for created since the start of January. Not terrible, especially when you play with a guy like Kyle Connor, who can take a lot of off your plate in terms of like scoring ability. But still, I think we're absolutely going to see Mark Scheifele's scoring production fall off in the second half of the season, which is why you should try to trade him. His value is pretty high, so to be honest, I would kind of be shooting for the sky for this, but if you're playing in smart fantasy hockey leagues, it might not be as easy to trade him. If you're not, probably a lot easier too, considering where he is standing-wise in your fantasy hockey league and just points-wise and goals-wise within the league. All right, the next guy we're going to be buying low on is Vincent Trocheck on the New York Rangers. So far in the season, 49 games played, 15 goals, 17 assists. Relatively, say, disappointing year for Trocheck, but certainly overall a disappointing year for the Rangers. So you kind of got to group it in with Trocheck here as well. Rangers were in a rut at the beginning of the year, but their offense is picking it up, and you're getting some really good starts out of Igor more recently. And Trocheck, just put it simply, has underperformed his metrics and his underlying analytics. 12th in individual expected goals for this season amongst centers, but it's just 32 points to show for it. If you look at other guys who are in the similar amount of offensive creation to Trocheck and where their points are, couple examples: Gensel, 49 points, Reinhart, 53 points, Aho, 50 points, who, in my opinion, I think is a pretty good comparable in terms of like their points production. If you're looking at Trocheck the last like 2 years, let's say, and their role within their teams, I would just say Trocheck is a little bit more physical. 140 hits this year is nothing to just kind of pass by at. Like, that's very important to see for a center or any forward or any player in your fantasy hockey team, for that matter, especially if you obviously are tracking hits in your league. Also, since the start of January, he leads all centers in faceoffs won, which is huge. Like, more than Crosby, more than any other center. A stat that I was pleasantly surprised to see for Vincent Trocheck as well. He's top 12 in expected goals for over that same span of where he's led all centers in faceoffs won. I think he's a great guy to trade for, considering where the Rangers are in the standings right now. Obviously going to be pushing for that playoff spot if they don't ultimately become total sellers at the deadline. So we're going to see Trocheck and this offense continue to push night in and night out. And with his underlying metrics, I think we're going to see a pretty solid second half from Trocheck. The other guy we're going to be selling high on in this video is Matt Duchene on the Dallas Stars, having a really solid year, having honestly the resurgence year we almost saw from Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, last year. He has 47 points in 49 games compared to 65 in 80 last season. But we're seeing some regression at this point. Really, since the start of January, his expected goals for is 3.12. That's over his last 13 games. So a very small amount of individual offensive creation. Like, he plays with a ton of playmakers and a ton of studs on the Dallas Stars. But you got to see that number be a lot higher. Like, that ranks 57th amongst centers over that span, which is not where he is in terms of points production. We also haven't seen this type of production from Duchene since his 21-22 season, which was his career year with the Predators, where he had 86 points. But before that, you've got to go back to his Colorado days to have him playing a full season and being at a point per game production. So I think we're definitely going to see some regression here from Duchene in the second half of the season. So yeah, I definitely try to trade him if you still could. I think he still carries a decent amount of value in fantasy hockey. Like, I know he's a center, so it's obviously harder to bargain, but he's higher than 80% rostered, I want to say, across all platforms. And just a guy that, at this point, looking at it, like 47 points in 49 games, it's hard to not be enticed by someone looking to trade that. So I would definitely be looking to get rid of Duchene and maybe buy low on one of the guys that I mentioned. Maybe you have to pair like a draft pick or something like that with it. All right, the last guy we're going to buy low on in this video is Joel Eriksson on the Minnesota Wild. Relatively disappointing year, I would say, for Ek at this point. And if you've watched this channel for at least a year or two, you know I'm a huge Joel Eriksson fan in terms of fantasy hockey, just because he does absolutely everything for the Minnesota Wild. And that's going to be even more elevated now that Kirill Kaprizov seems like he's going to be having surgery here at this point and is hurt again and will be out for, it seems, 6 to 8 weeks, pretty much up until it seems like the playoffs is the timeline. So they're going to need someone to step up and hold their playoff position. Phil Gustafson's playing terribly recently. Marco Rossi's really elevated his game. Boldy's been playing well, but Ek's going to have to do it as well. And if you look at Ek's numbers without Kaprizov, his last 10 games that he's played for the Wild without Kirill, 2 goals, 5 assists, so 7 points in 10 games, 4 power play points, 30 shots, so averaging 3 shots per game, which is solid, and I think you can see that number increase. 70 face-off wins. And his last 3 games he's played without Kaprizov, he's played 22, 20, and 25 minutes. You look at his time on ice average on the stat box here, it says 1934. You're going to see that increase with Kaprizov out if he continues to stay healthy. Joel Eriksson, that is, with Kaprizov out. So always a guy also that's going to have a high expected goals for number. Like I've talked to, he's like similar to Tavares or Brady Tkachuk, who just get a ton of pucks around the net or in offensive chances. Not necessarily going to convert on a super high number of them, but eventually when you do continue to create this much offense, those goals will start finding the back of the net. And a lot of offense that you're creating will start to turn into assists. And there's a ton of playmakers around Ek with Rossi, Boldy, Zuccarello, Hartman. Like this Wild team is still solid when you're looking at their top 6 in terms of skill contributors, even without Kaprizov out. So it's not like he loses all value with Kaprizov out. They barely even play together. So I think this just elevates his role and what he's going to have to do everywhere else on the ice. And one of those areas is going to be in the offensive end. Top 15 in expected goals for over the last month amongst centers. So the expectation is there. Himself and the Wild just need to capitalize on it, and I think he will. Expecting another big second half for Eriksson this year. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of buy low, sell high centers. Shout out to FanDuel Canada for sponsoring the video, and I'll see you guys next time.